Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast based on writers sitting around drinking coffee and or occasionally other spirits and talking about anything and everything. We may use explicit language and will almost certainly drop F-bombs, but none of that is the point or the drive of the content, so consider us PG-13. There will be rants and raves and occasionally readings. There will be conflicting creative advice driven by at least 3 disparate points of view. Today we have a special guest, David Speakman, and as well with me in the studio I have our web spider, David Welsh. This is episode 12, Online Zines and Game Writing. I'm a little grumpy because everybody else in my writing group all went off to either Burning Man or Worldcon in Dublin, leaving me alone, so alone.
What am I, chopped liver?
Dave is chopped liver, also known as pate. Welcome, David Speakman.
Well, thank you.
I invited David in because David has had a long and interesting career in writing and many different styles and completely justifies some of my earlier claims on different paths to writing, technical writing. So, David, you started out as a journalist, correct?
Yeah, it was accidental. I actually went to college for public relations and business communication. And it just so happened that my first job in college was working at an NPR station, and I ended up doing promotions and writing a weekly column, and it just went from there.
Cool. What kind of weekly column on a topic, or did they just let you go wild? Or?
It was This Week on NPR for in Muncie, Indiana. And then I ended up getting a job at the local student newspaper, writing a column because I was the president of the local organization. And then after I graduated, the only job I could get, I graduated in the early 90s during the H.W. Bush recession, and the only job I could get was a family friend owned a local community newspaper, and I got a job as a photographer and reporter. And from there, I went to a daily newspaper, and then after that, I got a job at a TV station, and then that brought me to Silicon Valley, and then I ended up working in .com writing. And I ended up being all kinds of different jobs. I've never not written, and I've never not gotten paid for my writing.
Now, David here my God, we have two Daves here. Mm-hmm. Dave Squared, Dave Primus was saying that he didn't feel that technical writing was real writing, and I was saying I disagree. So we were saying something interesting when we were getting ready to chat about this, talking about game writing.
Well, game writing mostly, there's 2 different types of writing you do in game writing. One is the creative writing where you're world building and you're developing a mythos and around the concept of what your game is. The other part, probably the more important part for the person who's actually going to play the game, is writing the rule book. And you craft a message where you try to relay, without actually talking to the person through words, about the instructions on how to do it, and you try to instill some of the flavor, but it's mostly technical writing. And technical writing is not creative writing, where you're not pulling things out of the air, out of the amorphous mass.
That was my point during that podcast, by the way, not what you said.
Right. So you're not taking things out of the amorphous mass and you're giving it life. What you're doing instead is you are very precisely writing in a way that is to communicate to the audience exactly what you mean. And I think that technical writing, learning how to be a technical writer, will help a creative writer because you get out of your own head and you start thinking through the eyes of the reader. And I think that's a very important skill for any writer to have, because most of us write to be read.
Absolutely. I was going to say, even just on played board games, of which I am very fond, does everybody have a list in their head of the worst game instructions ever? Because for me, it was the very first edition of Betrayal at House on the Hill that had to publish 22 pages of errata because it was not written clearly in the first place.
It's like they turn over the game instruction writing to IKEA. You just don't know what's going on. You follow the pictures most of the time, and most of us end up playing games wrong.
Yeah. I found, and yet others that you just got sucked in, and we mentioned this in another podcast, was White Wolf, which did not have as great a game mechanic system as Nightlife did, but their story writing was better. So when you were saying, it's like, okay, write a story, here's the mechanics of what vampires are like, now put that in the modern world. And that's, I think, the creative bridge between technical writing and creative writing.
Well, and a lot of times with game companies, and the reason why we got on this topic is because my current company I work for makes games. And that's why we got on this topic. But the thing about game writing is you usually end up with more than one writer. You end up with the creative writer who's writing the mythos, the story, the character interactions, the backgrounds. Then you end up with another writer who is actually explaining how to play the game. And they don't always mesh well, and that's probably what happened. That I know exactly that's what happens with White Wolf and or Wizards of the Coast. But unfortunately, that happens with most game companies.
And I was just looking, every once in a while I read authors' bios. Jonathan Howard, who wrote the magnificent Johannes Cabal Necromancer series, his background is solidly, I wrote games. And so that is a perfectly viable route into market. You know, if you one day want to publish serial novels, well, write anything, but games are a good place to start.
Well, especially, I'm sorry, to step on what you're saying, but especially with a game company, because when you are writing and you say, hey, I can not only do the creative part, but I can do the technical aspect, you're more likely to get a job because that's one person they're paying. Mm-hmm. It's most likely, even though you're making more, their overall bill is going to be less. So a game company is going to be more interested in you if you know both the technical aspects. It's easy. Technical writing for this is just a recipe on how to play a game. Yeah. So if you have ever written a recipe down, you already have the mechanics of how to be a technical writer.
Yeah, you say that, but there is some crap recipe writing out there too.
Right. Well, some people don't have it down, but they do it anyway. True of any writing.
Yeah, I mean, you can either follow the formula, which for a recipe is here's the ingredients and the amount and percentage, and then preheat to this. The basic step-by-step instructions. Right. And I have found, I don't know if it's different, but these days it's harder and harder to follow recipes that I read online that are written these days because they're missing the formula. So there's an importance of formula in that and in any kind of writing, I suppose.
Well, it's like they illuminate it. Like in the old days where they had the pictures and they had the backstory because everybody because they read really good writers of recipe books and they want to write like that, but they forget the basic is somebody's reading this because they want to know how to make some food.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to get to the point.
Yeah. So what I was going to say earlier was you mentioned Jonathan Howard and his background is in game writing.
Sorry, Jonathan.
Do you think he was the creative writer or the technical writer?
I think we should totally ask him. So, Jonathan, somewhere out there, you're going to get a Twitter question from me. If it goes to Johannes, please refer it to Jonathan if you two are still speaking. Yeah, and it is because the recipe writing is harder. And now people say, oh, everyone consumes things via video. And we talked to Alice, and Alice said, yes, we do absolutely consume as a younger generation video. And yet you can't Google video words. You still somewhere things need to be in print for you to say, how many cups of flour do I need to make 20 loaves of French bread? And that's something that somewhere somebody still needs to do the mechanical bits of it. So to jump from kind of gaming and instructions over on another side of it, you mentioned the journalism. Tell us about, I met David originally from Typebeam magazine when you were running an online zine. How did you get started with that?
Well, Typebeam has an interesting and storied history. It started in the early 60s, either 1960 or 1961, and I don't know the actual date because it was started by Marion Zimmer Bradley, and she's dead, and so you can't ask her. But it started out as a letter zine, and just to give you a little bit of...
tell everyone what a letter zine
is. Letter zines don't exist anymore because we have the internet. But back in the ancient days, when I was a teenager, I belonged to this organization called the N3F. It's the National Fantasy Fan Federation, or n3f.org, it still exists. And what that is it's a fandom club. It's national, and in the olden days, fans either got together by going to conventions, and between conventions, which usually happen once a year, or if you go to multiple conventions, you may go to like 3 or 4 of them if you're a normal person. what people used to do is they used to write letters and they would make friends. But letter zines were a collection of letters written by different people about themselves, about things that they've discovered, movie reviews, things on TV, things to look for, upcoming conventions that you've not heard of. And
I want to read them now.
It's called the internet.
It's replaced by the internet, but before, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s, this was all done through letter zines. And the reason why they were created is because there was no mass market. So regular paid media wouldn't do it, so a bunch of people started doing it on their own. And that's really what a zine is. It's amateur publication that you make, whether it's electronic or in paper. You make it and you distribute it to people, and it's usually to a very select subset of people who are interested in that same topic. And so I ended up inheriting Typebeam after, like around 2010, 2011, many years after it almost died. And I transformed it from a letter zine, which people don't use anymore because of the internet and email and Facebook and social media. I transformed it into something called a gen zine, focusing on fiction. And it was the idea.
Is gen standing for genre in there just as a
general?
Oh,
Gen.
Okay. Didn't you?
But no, it's fine. No, it's so gen stands for general, and it's just a general topic. It's about whatever the editor wants it to be about. And I turned it into a fiction zine with some news and reviews for fandom-oriented science fiction, fantasy, and supernatural horror. And that started under me, and now currently it's continued to that incarnation under a different editor. Usually somebody is an editor of this particular zine for a few years until they get burned out, and then they pass it on to the next person. And being involved in zine writing is a great way for a person to learn how to publish regularly, write, edit, and do layout for publications.
Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah.
Well, I had the same gig for the International Fantasy Gaming Society for a while.
What did you do for, that was IFGS, that was Denver Boulder?
Yeah, I published the local newsletter, and I don't even remember which newsletters. I published a couple of them. But.
Right, now that was the IFGS was based on, I think didn't the name come from a book from Stephen Barnes-Chance and, Stephen Barnes. Did I have it wrong?
Yeah, and Larry Niven.
And Larry Niven, yeah. So that was the
right.
LARPing in the 90s, as it were.
Yep.
And the IFGS sort of ended up growing out from there and becoming a bigger thing, but still probably not as big as like Amtgard and some of the other.
Well, I don't know, because I haven't been involved in the scene for a long time now. And neither have you, as far as I know.
I have not. Now, here's a question for imagining Typebeam as a zine. Was it just in... Is it a website that you have, or what is it?
So the N3F exists, and they
how does N3F relate to Typebeam? Tell me.
They own it. So basically, they don't really own it. So N3F it's a collection of fans, and so the fans kind of own it collectively.
What does N3F stand for?
N3F stands for the National Fantasy Fan Federation.
Oh,
so it should be NF3.
Not another three fans, is what I was thinking.
No. That's kind of hilarious. But it's been in existence since the 1940s. This is the oldest national fan organization. And most zines themselves, zine is just short for magazine, and in a zine itself is usually an amateur, or it's usually given out free, and they very rarely pay anything to anybody. And the person who does the most of the work is the editor who actually puts it together. The writers do a lot of work. Editing writers is interesting, to say the least. And if you get involved with a zine, you will probably be pressured into editing one soon because they're hard work. But if you join an organization like N3F, which costs anything from $0 to $18 a year, depending on what you're willing to pay.
Big spending.
What you're willing to pay, you get access to all of their zines for free, but they encourage you to do a paid membership because it helps pay for the zines and everything to be made. I think they currently have like 6 or 7 zines that they do, ranging from general zines to a club zine. They got things delegating they're topic oriented, like things like movies or manga or whatever your fandom is, whatever floats your boat. And if you really like something and want to write, you can probably make your own on any topic you really care about, as long as it's family friendly.
Now let's say let's pretend here I wanted to have all the Genie zine, and I wanted to run it through N3F. How would I do such a thing?
Actually, that happens a lot. So there are a couple of ways to get started in zine writing. Probably the most easy way to do it is contact the editor of a zine that you're interested in and start writing for it, and ask the editor questions, because everyone loves to talk about what they do, and they will explain to you how they do everything. If you want to start your own zine, it's as simple as if you have a word processing program, say Word, if you use Mac, or if you use if you use PC, or Windows. I'm the old person. I say PC. If you use any kind of word processing program and you can save as PDF, that's usually the easiest way, because anybody who has access to a tablet or to a computer or the internet has the access, has the ability to read a PDF. So if you any word processing program where you can save to PDF, you're already about 80% of the way of making a zine. The only thing you have to do after that is write stuff, drag and drop pictures in, move things around, and make it so it's readable by other people. If you're passionate about something, odds are there's at least 20 to 2,000 other people out there who are also passionate about the same project or same topic. Make a zine, publish it, and distribute it.
Well, yeah, you say that. How do I find those other 20,000 people, though, is the interesting.
So in the modern age where everything's internet, the easiest way to do that is to find groups on, say, Facebook, or through chat rooms, or through organizations like the N3F, who will actually find audiences for you.
So is this like Instagram, or which chat rooms do they? You see, I do chat rooms, and for me that was, I remember IRC, and so I'm old. So is there a modern?
Well, no, it'd be like things like it'd be the microblogging places, which would be things like Tumblr or Instagram or Facebook groups, any place where people tend to get into a fandom. And when you are in a Facebook group, you can just say, hey, this is where I have the zine that I put out on this topic. If you're interested, go here and look at it.
Neat. And somewhere in there, I presume you also learn how to build web pages, because do you want to have your own, or is that the advantage of going in through an N3F?
Or any other organization. So
right.
There are many organizations that do it. I think N3F, for those of us who are interested in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, that's probably the easiest way to go through it. There's also different online fanzine organizations that actually host fanzines. Just Google fanzine, and you'll get tons of places where you can... that'll gladly take your zine, put it up, and give you credit.
So two topics overlapping. I'm sure there's got to be fanzines for fanfic.
Yes. Yes. Fanfic. I'm sure that fanfic is a loaded term. Some people think it's horrible. Mm-hmm. Other authors who are published now got their start in fanfic and totally encourage it, because when you borrow another person's world in their viewpoint, it allows you to get rid of the world building and focus on character development and other parts which are very much needed in fiction writing.
Oh, yes. I had a friend who helped me by reading up she pointed me towards fanfic about Hannibal. So for those of you who love Hannibal Lecter in the news, it was the fanfic romance between Hannibal and the agent.
Oh, slash fiction. That actually started, like most of fandom, with Star Trek. So
was that Kirk and Spock?
Yeah, Spock fanfic. That was in the 1960s. There was a woman whose name is Jacqueline Lichtenberg. She is an author in her own right who has written an entire series of books that are loosely based on Star Trek, but it started out as Star Trek fanfic. She and her group actually created the modern movement of the way current conventions run when they started doing Star Trek conventions back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Right. I've seen pictures from the earlier conventions. As near as I can tell, conventions in the 70s wore less clothes.
Well, that was the 70s, though. So.
I know it's hard to think. You always think of the next generation as being less confirmed, but frankly, I got to say something about them boomers.
Even those of us who are Gen X remember back in the 80s when shorts used to be short and they didn't go below your knee. Now everything was like everyone's wearing culottes. So it goes in waves. I think that it's changing. It'll change back. People will start showing ankle again pretty soon.
Now, books on fanfic, though.
Depends on where the economy goes.
It does.
Can't afford much fabric.
Judith Shepeshi, our other lawyer friend, David here also has a law degree. But she came in and talked about the challenge of trademarking and copywriting and where fanfic, and it's kind of that magic gray world.
Really. Well, the weird thing about, and I have a background in intellectual property too, and trademarking and copy, and I'm sure you talked about, there are the 4 different levels of intellectual property.
Yep.
The ones you have to worry about are unfair trade practices and copyright when you're dealing with doing fanfic. Not really trademark as much, but yeah.
So I can still write a Chekhov and Scotty, the foreigners get together and...
Oh, yeah. As long as you don't charge anything for it and you never have any intent to make money off of it, you can do anything you want. We have a wonderful thing called the First Amendment in the United States.
Yeah, but the challenge is... so I suppose it's, my friends that draws really cool things like Jackal Design. She makes things for our Stormtrooper team and occasionally puts them up and then gets the cease and desist orders from Disney because Disney has no sense of humor.
Right. But yeah, well, Disney now, since they bought 20th Century Fox, they own almost everything now.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing how they've rolled all that up there. Their patent list must be enormous.
They tend to trademark a lot of things. In fact, they have things under copyright, but most of their copyrights from the earliest things like Mickey Mouse cartoons are going to be expiring in a couple of years, and so they ended up trademarking.
Yeah,
Mickey
and
Mouse.
they're actually going to expire this time because I don't think they can get the
trademark.
The trademarks extended another time.
Well, trademarks are forever as long as you keep them up. But copyright copyright becomes public domain after a few years, and the United States is the longest copyright in the world.
Well, and part of that is because Disney has lobbied to have it extended a couple times, right?
Yes, it was the Sonny Bono Act of in the 1990s that extended copyright. It's for corporations; it goes out to 99 years. For a person, it only goes. I think it goes 70 some years if it's an individual. So Disney's got special dispensation because of that.
I wonder if there's anywhere a website that somebody's put together and said when the authors died, when you can start writing. Oh, is there one? Where?
Yes, it's run out of the University of North Carolina and or Duke. It's somewhere in North Carolina.
We're going to link this, by the way.
Yeah. So you just do Public Domain Day, and it's always the 1st of January, and they list all of the works that are going public domain every year. And between the late 90s and actually last year, they would just say, this would have been public domain had the United States not screwed everybody over and allow things allow copyrights to expire. And if you want to talk about that's a very interesting topic, copyrights expiring away, that's important. But as of this year, 2019, we actually had new things.
We're coming into the roaring 20s.
We actually had new things that actually have started going to public domain in the U.S.
So I'm wondering if we're going to see a resurgence of Edgar Allan Poe and some of the others anytime now, because I'm ready for new Poe works the same way that they've done early Sherlock and other.
We had a Tarzan book that just came in. A couple more Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff is going to be coming through. Also, I think also coming up is Buck Rogers in a couple of years is going to become public domain.
Yeah. See, I remember Buck Rogers was the TV show that we all watched in the 70s. So
right, it's based on a comic strip that was in the 1920s and 30s. But those will start coming into public domain soon.
Awesome.
So they come into public domain as they were written, right? So if somebody has a career of 10 or 20 years of writing, say Edgar Rice Burroughs writing Tarzan, then the novels come online one at a time as they were published.
Or John Carter and stuff like that. Yeah, so what happens is, the character itself will be public domain. So you can, like for instance, with Buck Rogers, and what's another one that's...
well, you just said John Carter, but they made a movie of John Carter. Does that change things? Fucking Disney.
So what changes things if they added anything new to it? The new content that Disney added, that's copyrighted.
Okay. And
that'll be copyrighted for 99 years, so don't even bother that stuff. Mm-hmm. But the stuff that was the original source material, the name John Carter, to be able to use it that he's a guy who's from Earth and he ends up going into space, someplace called Mars or Barsoom. That is all public domain. So you can use that concept. You can use those characters that were from the original source material. You just can't use what Disney added to it.
Right.
For instance, L. Frank Baum's Oz,
Yes.
everything he wrote, all the art in his books that came out before 1923, that is all public domain. But if you go to the old MGM musical, where they changed Glinda from being the Good Witch of the North to the Good Witch of the South, South to the Good Witch of the North, they had it backwards, and they gave her green skin and that kind of stuff, that's not in the book. So that stuff is still copyrighted by MGM for a few more years until 1939. Stuff goes to public domain.
I was liking how Gregory Maguire has been writing, bits of it, like the Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister and Wicked, and now there's musicals on it, so it's got its own little bit of, he did his own twist, right?
Oh, yeah, and then also, so he gave the Wicked Witch a name, which didn't exist in the books.
Yeah.
Elphaba, or whatever, which is actually L.
Frank Baum.
L.F. Baum, Elphaba, it comes from his name, but that is copyrighted. So he actually owns that. So nobody else can call the Wicked Witch that name because he has that under copyright.
Boy. So for something like John Carter, then that character from the original source material becomes public domain, after the first copyrighted novel expires? Or
Yes.
the first mention of him?
And any adventures that he has in that first book or first story or first comic or first anything in print.
Right.
Once that becomes public domain, anybody can borrow it and use it and go on from that. So that allows people to use concepts, words, excerpts in new works without having to pay royalties to somebody who is long dead to some company who's never knew that person, without having to share any of your income with some big corporation.
Right. But if you went to Venus 10 years later, you have to wait those 10 years before you can send
Yes.
them to Venus yourself.
No, you can send the person to Venus because Venus exists.
You
just
okay.
can't.
You can't call it whatever they call
You can't.
it.
If the spaceship was called Venus 4, you can't use a spaceship called Venus 4 to get to Venus because that concept is still copyrighted. But the that order of things, John Carter to Venus in Venus 4 would be still copyrighted. But if you sent John Carter to Venus, which is you can do whatever you want because Venus exists.
Okay.
You're not making something up. You just have to.
Got to make the John Carter goes to Uranus joke.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I do.
No, you don't.
It was
Already
inevitable.
did. Done. It's done. It
Move on.
Excellent. Yeah, I was thinking about this in terms of it's the making money thing coming back. How if you're just writing fanfic and you're not planning to profit from it, you just want people to read it and you want to write it. Yet there have been different mushes that I remember. Like the minute they came up with, it was a mud originally. Multi-user to mention that they made one of Penzik, and then Penzik said, "Yeah, you can't use Penzik in your mud," which they really didn't have a legal ground to stand on for that because it's not a copyrighted thing. It's just a place.
It's a name.
They have a trademark on it, which is similar. It's
if they filed a trademark.
So what happens is they have this. So whenever you make anything and you have a business doing it, you have a trademark that's automatically done and under common law. You don't have to file for anything. You
right.
Own
Judith told us a little bit about how you don't have to file it to get it.
You don't have to file it. It exists automatically. Now, if somebody starts using it and they start stepping on your brand and they start changing it in a way that you think
could hurt you,
then that's called unfair trade.
Yeah, and I didn't think it was. This was just where you go around, stomp around,
you're just
kill two chucks and puff. Hit puff.
Right. But if you're not making any, business off of it, there's no pecuniary interest, there's no money exchanging hands, you're not affecting their ability to make money. They have no say in what you do because, like I said, we have the First Amendment in the United States. You're allowed to pretty much do whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm other people.
Right. That makes sense.
So follow the money, once again.
Always follow the money. Yeah. Do you have any other current projects you're working on right now you want to tell people about in advance?
Well, right now, the company I'm working for called Double Critical, doublecritical.com. We're making games. which is...
I was a Kickstarter on one of them. It's like, yay.
Oh, yeah, that's a political game. That was our first one. We wanted to do a simple game. Oh, my gosh, this is such a sticky wicket. It's a simple game. So that we can make all of our mistakes because we're new to game making for profit, and hopefully. And so we decided to make this political game, this little card game with a couple tokens, and we made about every single mistake you could on the way. We're losing so much money on it. We just hope somebody buys it. Because we have other games coming out that are actually
when it comes out and is available, by the way, we will link to this on the thing, so feel free to go and buy the political game.
Oh yes, please, because we actually have more fantasy oriented with things with like magic and monsters that are coming out too. But
I don't know. Sometimes the political is kind of magic and monsters in its own.
There are
way.
a lot of
It's
monsters,
like,
but it's
come
totally,
on, it's like Kremlin. We all played Kremlin, and it's the old Soviet political game.
Yeah.
So this one's similar.
No, it's not. It's totally. It's completely nonpartisan, and it's all. The only thing fantasy about it is that there are no real parties. It's based on the U.S. Politics, but it's not partisan in any way. It's just more drink some beer, eat some pretzels, and screw over your friends.
Fair enough.
It's kind of fun.
And the next one you have coming up?
We have one that's based on. It takes characters through 3 eras. One is like Middle Earth type, but it's not Middle Earth because that's copyrighted.
Right.
So it's like trolls and elves, and then it goes to then you bring them into modern day, and then you send everybody into space. So you have things like trolls and demons and people in space. Right, and you basically it's kind of a combination between a card building and a war game, and it's kind of like Risk, but it's not really.
Look forward to it. We're going to put links to the interesting things we've mentioned on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. We answer email and messages. Please, for the love of God, somebody write to us. It's very, very lonely. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, which is a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre McGaffey-Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Today's sponsor is Jackal Designs. They are going to set up and let you buy cool Writers Drinking Coffee swag, and you can find Jackal's design on Facebook.